Hi, Professor Mike here to teach you a magic trick that uses friction. Friction is, of course, the resistance that one object feels when moving across another object. There's a lot of friction when you're wearing your shoes on the floor, but not a lot when you can slide across that same floor with that sock. Today we're going to do a magic trick with friction. Now before we get started with the magic, I want to show you a little bit more about friction, what can increase friction, what can decrease friction, and to do that we're going to use a spring scale. This is actually a scale. You could use it to weigh things, but it's really not as accurate. So we're going to use it as a hook as we pull along, and on it there's two readings. There's a grams and there's a newtons. And newtons is how we measure force, or how much work it takes to do something in science. We're going to use this, and we're going to drag along a large mug to see how much force it will take to pull it along, measuring the friction in different situations. Let's get started. So we're going to use our spring scale to move this mug. And remember, as this mug moves along, friction is working in the opposite direction. So if the mug is going this way, friction is trying to push it or resist its movement that way. This will allow us to kind of measure how much force it takes to get this thing moving. And when I pull it, that was right around 1.5 newtons. We can try it again. That was a little less. And you can see that with nothing going, it takes somewhere between 1.25 and 1.5 newtons to just get this mug to move. Now, let's reduce our friction. So you can reduce friction two ways. One is by changing the surface, which we're going to do now. The other is by reducing the mass or the weight or the matter in this. And we can't really do that with this mug. We can't make it smaller, but I can add some felt to the bottom. And now when I pull it along, remember before we were somewhere in this area when it moved, and now we're much less friction. You can tell on the initial movement how much force it was taking to get this mug moving. Now we have felt on the bottom. That was 0.75 to just get it moving. And that's because this material has less friction with the countertop than the mug itself. Now let's say we wanted to increase our friction or make it harder to move this mug. We could change the bottom or the surface to something that even has more friction, maybe like some kind of rubber or something that's a little bit Let's say we wanted to actually increase the friction and make this mug harder to move. We could change the surface, change the bottom here, or change the countertop surface to make friction greater, or we could also add mass or add a lot of matter to the bowl itself, which is what we're going to do with some water. And if I pour water in there, what that does is it gives this whole container more mass. So when I try and pull it now, we are well past where we were initially, and it went all the way to that went to 2.5 before it moved, 2.5 newtons. So it doubled the amount of force it took to move this container when we added a cup of water in it. And you can see that again. Considerable more friction, and the friction in that case was increased because we added mass. So we've changed the mass of our container, and we've changed the bottom surface of the container to both increase and decrease the friction of pulling this along the countertop. One thing we haven't done is change the surface of the countertop to increase our friction, which we can do by using this rubber mat. And now when I pull along on this, you'll see, I'll put my hand so you can see it, there's a much greater level of friction as evident by my spring scale telling me I'm pulling at 2.5 newtons and going very slowly. Now we know that rubber will reduce friction, which is why oftentimes when we have to open up a jar, we put on our rubber glove to make sure we get a good grip. Now, Let's try a little magic trick. So what I have here is I have two cards, a 6 and a 9, and I'm going to take them and place them in separate parts of my deck of cards here and push them in, losing them in the deck. And all it will take is a snap of the fingers and a bit of a wave, and 1, 2, 3, those cards come right back. The secret to this magic trick is actually twofold. The first part is I have two sets of cards. I have the 6 of spades and 9 of clubs, and the 9 of spades and 6 of clubs. I take one of these two pairs and I put one on the top and one on the bottom. Now I do that before I do the actual trick. I take the other two and I place them on top of my deck, and this is a regular deck of cards. And then I can say I'm set. I can say I have two cards here. Now you don't call out or say which cards you have, but you can say I have a 6 and a 9. And you really do put them in the middle of the deck, and it does not matter where, because you're really losing them in the deck. This is when the friction comes in, because you're going to use the friction that you have between your fingers and the cards to hold back that bottom card and that top card. So when I just push the deck over like this, I did a little slower there, those two cards kind of stay on your fingers. So if I do it at a fast speed, 1, 2, 3, you have two cards left. And of course you don't say, you just say I have the 6 and the 9, and the people usually forget which one was clubs and which one was spades. Try this one at home because it uses a little friction. Thanks for watching today as we learned a little bit about friction. Things that can increase friction, decrease friction, and even a magic trick using friction. So next time you have a deck of cards, or you just need to open a bottle or a jar with a rubber glove, remember, you are using friction. Thanks for watching, and never stop learning.